The Ascendants, tall, imposing beings with shimmering silver skin and bright, piercing eyes, had traveled from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Their mission was one of scientific curiosity and peaceful diplomacy. As they explored the uncharted corners of the cosmos, they had seen countless civilizations, some advanced, some primitive, but none quite like Earth. Orbiting silently above the planet, the Ascendant fleet was a sight to behold. Massive ships, each the size of a city, hung in the sky like dark moons. The stars glimmered in the vast expanse beyond, but Earth was a speck of blue and green, so much smaller than the other planets they had encountered. Yet there was something odd about it. Something off. "We've analyzed the planet thoroughly, Commander Xylar," said Zekar, a young Ascendant scientist, tapping his terminal with delicate fingers. "Earth's biological diversity is remarkable. Over 7 billion inhabitants, many of them still primitive in comparison to us. They don't even know about most of their own species. Fascinating." Xylar, the fleet's commander, tilted his head, studying the data on his screen. "Primitive," he muttered. "Yet they occupy every corner of their world, even the most hostile environments. How have they managed this?" Zekar looked up, a curious frown crossing his face. "I cannot explain it, Commander. Their biology is weak compared to ours. They seem fragile, with a lifespan barely a fraction of ours. Yet they've survived wars, natural disasters, and diseases that should have wiped them out. And now, they're spreading out of control." Xylar's eyes narrowed, his mind working rapidly. He had heard stories of primitive species that defied the odds, but humanity was different. The more they observed, the more questions arose. The humans' success did not match their apparent fragility. Xylar had studied the galaxy's most formidable species, and none of them had such seemingly insignificant beginnings. "They are not as fragile as they seem," Xylar muttered, more to himself than to his crew. "We'll need to meet them, observe them firsthand." And so, with calculated precision, the Ascendant fleet prepared to make contact. The mission was simple: gather intelligence, assess the human threat, or lack thereof, and leave the planet untouched. The Ascendants had no intention of making Earth a colony. Their only goal was understanding. On the surface, Earth's nations scrambled to prepare for the arrival of extraterrestrial visitors. The media buzzed with excitement. Governments worked in secrecy to craft official responses, and ordinary citizens waited in awe and fear. For all of Earth's technological advances, humanity had never encountered life beyond their own planet. The world was about to change forever, and no one knew how. As the Ascendant flagship descended through the clouds, Xylar's mind churned with the data they had gathered. His crew would perform the first contact, a peaceful exchange of knowledge. They had studied Earth's languages and customs, and they would speak with the humans in a way that was both respectful and calculating. After all, the Ascendants believed they were the superior species in every way. "Prepare the transport," Xylar commanded. "We are going to meet them. Let's see what makes them so dangerous." Unbeknownst to the Ascendants, humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology or their biology. It was in something far simpler, something the Ascendants had no way of predicting: their resilience, and perhaps, just maybe, something as innocent as a cup of coffee. The moment the Ascendant team made landfall, Earth's first contact with a galactic superpower was about to begin. The Ascendant team, led by Commander Xylar, landed at a secluded base in the remote hills of North America. Their ship, a sleek and silver behemoth, hovered silently above the ground, casting an eerie shadow over the sprawling landscape. From the surface, the humans below could see the gleaming metallic form as it touched down, the first physical sign of contact with a species from beyond the stars. The world watched with bated breath. Human diplomats had been prepared for this moment for years, and they moved with coordinated precision. Among them was Captain Sarah Flynn, a seasoned officer who had led humanity's military operations, but her role today was one of peace. She stood at the forefront, her expression calm yet alert as she met the ascendants at the foot of their craft. Xylar's gaze swept over the humans gathered before him. To his surprise, they seemed unimpressive. The humans stood straight and proud, but physically, they were smaller, their bodies nowhere near as powerful as the ascendants. The diplomat's eyes, though filled with curiosity, did not betray fear. "We welcome you, representatives of the Ascendant Fleet," Captain Flynn said, her voice steady but warm. "I am Captain Sarah Flynn of the United Nations of Earth. It is an honor to make contact with your civilization." Xylar observed her closely, his piercing eyes calculating. It was evident that Earth's leaders were trying to make a good impression, but he could already tell that humanity was outclassed in every possible way. "We come in peace," Xylar said, his voice cold and measured. "We seek only to observe and understand your species." The humans nodded politely, but Flynn's eyes narrowed slightly, her mind racing through the years of diplomatic strategy that had led to this very moment. She gestured toward a large open-air pavilion, where they had set up a welcoming ceremony. As the exchange continued, Xylar's team was offered refreshments, a simple beverage, dark and steaming. The humans had made a point to offer this drink to their visitors, as they had done in every meeting with foreign dignitaries. The drink was called coffee, a commonplace substance on Earth, though its cultural significance was unknown to the Ascendants. Captain Flynn smiled politely and handed a steaming cup to Xylar. "It's coffee, a tradition on our planet, one that brings warmth and clarity. Please, enjoy." Xylar took the cup, holding it delicately, curious but not expecting much. He brought it to his lips and took a small sip. Almost instantly, his eyes widened. The sensation was strange, a sudden surge of alertness, a sharpness of mind he had never felt before. His thoughts, usually slow and deliberate, now raced. He could feel his senses becoming heightened, the world around him more vivid, every detail clearer. It was as if he could process thousands of calculations in mere seconds. But it didn't stop there. A strange, almost dizzying wave of energy washed over him. His mind was firing at an unprecedented speed, but it wasn't a controlled surge. It felt chaotic. His thoughts clashed together in rapid-fire succession, and for the first time in his life, Xylar felt disoriented. Beside him, his crew members were already experiencing the same effects. Zikar, the scientist, looked as though he might fall over, clutching his head in bewilderment. The leader of the Ascendant Fleet, normally a composed, calculating figure, was now visibly struggling to maintain his poise. "What is happening?" Xylar demanded, his voice trained. Captain Flynn watched with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. She had seen this before in countless meetings with Earth's more eccentric allies. She had seen the same wide-eyed reaction when people first encountered the effects of coffee. But she had no idea it would have such a pronounced effect on these hyper-intelligent beings. "It's just coffee," Flynn explained, trying to keep her tone light. "It's a simple drink. It helps humans focus." But to the Ascendants, it was far more than that. They had never encountered anything like this before. Their species, accustomed to complete mental control and stability, now felt out of control. Their minds, usually sharp and precise, were now swimming in a haze of hyperactivity. The other members of the Ascendant delegation were starting to fall into disarray. One of them, his arms trembling, dropped his cup, spilling coffee on the ground. Another, a communications officer, began to mumble incoherently. "Are you all right?" Flynn asked, concern masking her amusement. Xylar blinked rapidly, trying to focus. This substance is affecting us in ways we cannot comprehend," he said, his voice sharp with growing frustration. "It is altering our minds in ways that should not be possible." The human diplomats exchanged knowing glances. It had become clear that the coffee, this simple, humble drink, had become a weapon in their hands. The Ascendants had underestimated humanity, and now, in their arrogance, they had fallen prey to their own overconfidence. But the ascendants were not used to losing control, and as the strange effects of the coffee began to take hold, a dangerous realization began to settle over them. They had just made a crucial mistake. Humanity was far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Thylar, still grappling with the sudden onslaught of energy and confusion, tried to steady himself, clutching the arm of his chair. His breathing was shallow, and for the first time in his life, he could feel a faint panic rising within him, a sensation he had never experienced. Zikar, his ever-faithful scientist, stood beside him, his usually composed expression now a mixture of alarm and curiosity. "This is impossible," Thylar muttered, his voice strained as he struggled to push through the overwhelming rush of thoughts in his mind. "This substance, it's altering us, infecting our cognition." Zikar reached down to pick up the cup that had slipped from his hand, his fingers trembling. I've never encountered anything like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is not just a stimulant. It's as if our entire neural network is being rewired." The humans around them, seemingly unaffected by the chaos unfolding before them, exchanged knowing glances. They had seen this before, many times. It was always the same. First-time drinkers, especially those with no tolerance to caffeine, would experience a shock to their systems. To the humans, it was almost laughable. Coffee had been a staple for centuries, a comfort, a source of strength, but the aliens had no frame of reference for it. Commander Xylar, despite his growing unease, forced himself to stand tall. This cannot be allowed," he said, his voice now laced with cold command. "We must learn more about this substance, understand what it has done to us. This human drink is more dangerous than I thought. I'll have the science teams begin an analysis immediately," Zikar said, his hands now steadying himself as the initial shock wore off. But even his scientific mind was reeling. How could a simple beverage affect them so profoundly? They were the most advanced species in the galaxy, and yet something so seemingly innocent could render them vulnerable. As the Ascendants started to regain some semblance of control over their minds, they realized they were being watched. The humans, far from alarmed by the turn of events, were merely waiting for the Ascendants to regain composure. Captain Flynn, the diplomat leading the humans, didn't appear disturbed in the slightest. She took a slow, measured sip of her own coffee, as though she were enjoying a perfectly ordinary afternoon. Thylar's gaze flicked to Flynn. "How did you know? How did you predict this?" he demanded, his voice growing more tense with each passing moment. "You knew this would happen. This was no accident." Flynn met his gaze calmly, her lips curling into a slight, knowing smile. "It's not exactly a secret," she said, her tone cool but not mocking. "Coffee's been a part of human life for centuries. It's a simple thing, but it can help us focus, help us think clearly. It's just a part of who we are." Xylar's sharp mind raced. Could this drink, this unassuming liquid, really be the key to understanding humanity's unexpected resilience? The Ascendants had assumed that humans were weak, physically, intellectually, and technologically. They had believed their sophisticated minds and advanced technologies made them the superior species in every regard. But this simple, earthbound drink was making their highly refined intelligence waver. Xylar's mind began to tick over, pieces falling into place. Could it be that this coffee is the reason they've survived? "We have observed your species for mere days," Xylar continued, his voice dropping to a more contemplative tone. "Yet we find no indication of exceptional physical capabilities. Your weapons are primitive, your technology rudimentary, but in every instance you have survived, thrived even in environments that should have crushed your kind long ago. And now, this." Zikar spoke up, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and disbelief. Could this coffee be the reason they have survived?" Flynn gave a small nod, though her expression remained neutral. I don't think you quite understand yet. Coffee doesn't just sharpen our minds temporarily. It's part of a bigger picture. Humans don't rely on raw strength. We rely on creativity, adaptability, and yes, focus. Coffee, in many ways, is a tool. Not just for us as individuals, but for our entire species. It helps us think, adapt, and stay ahead in ways other species don't. And when we work together, well, that's when we truly become dangerous. Tyler's mind reeled. So that's it. They had been seeing only the surface, never understanding the true complexity beneath. They had underestimated humanity's most powerful resource, its ability to think and innovate. While other species relied on physical strength, advanced weapons, or biological superiority, humans had learned to think their way through any challenge. And coffee, this simple, humble drink, was the key to unlocking that mental potential. But something else lingered in Tyler's mind, a thought that hadn't fully formed yet. This wasn't just about the coffee. This was something far deeper. The Ascendants were discovering that humanity's true power lay not in their ability to defeat, but in their ability to outthink and outmaneuver any enemy that stood before them. "We've made a grave mistake," Tyler murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "This coffee, it's not just a drink. It's a symbol, a weapon, a key to a power we never anticipated." The implications of this revelation were staggering. The Ascendants had come to Earth to learn about a primitive species, and instead they had stumbled upon the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy, human ingenuity, fueled by coffee. But Tyler had no idea how far humans were willing to go to protect that power. The Ascendants had barely begun to recover from their chaotic encounter with coffee when a new, even more disorienting challenge emerged. The situation, initially thought to be a diplomatic exchange, was rapidly escalating into something far more intricate and potentially dangerous. Tyler had summoned a meeting of his top officers aboard the flagship, his mind still reeling from the earlier shock. He stared out of the observation window, watching Earth's spinning blue-green orb below, while his crew assembled around him in a tense silence. "We must adapt," Tyler said, his voice low, every word carefully measured. "The humans have revealed a weakness in us, one we cannot ignore. Their coffee has destabilized us. If they can do this to us, what else could they do?" Zekar, still recovering from the effects of the drink, was the first to speak. "Commander, I've analyzed our physiological response to the coffee. It's not just a stimulant. The humans, they've engineered this drink for maximum cognitive disruption. If they understand how to manipulate this, they could potentially take control of our entire fleet." A murmur rippled through the officers, a chill creeping into the air. If humans could manipulate something so simple, so ubiquitous in their culture, to break down the Ascendants' mental stability, what other tricks might they be hiding? Tyler, ever the strategist, began to feel the weight of the situation. "We cannot allow them to see this as a weakness," Tyler said, turning sharply to face his officers. "We must learn to counteract it. But we must also learn their true strength, why they were able to survive when countless other species failed." Zekar nodded. "Their physical capabilities are inferior, but their ingenuity, it's unpredictable. Their ability to innovate on the fly, to find creative solutions in impossible situations, is staggering. Perhaps even more dangerous than their ability to brew coffee." Tyler considered this. If the Ascendants were to ever defeat humanity, or at least understand them fully, they would need to dive deeper into human behavior and thinking. It wasn't just about their physical weaknesses, it was about how they approached every challenge, no matter how small. Tyler was starting to understand that humanity's true strength lay not in their brute force, but in their capacity for creativity and adaptability. "Let us put them to the test," Tyler said, his eyes narrowing. "We will challenge them to a series of simulations, a test of strategy, intellect, and resourcefulness. We will push them to their limits, make them show us what they are truly capable of." Zekar raised an eyebrow. You think they will accept such a challenge? They might interpret it as a threat. They'll accept it, Zyler said, the certainty in his voice cutting through the tension. Humans are arrogant in their own way. They believe they are invincible, that their ingenuity makes them superior. Let us see how they handle a true test of their abilities. The challenge was set. The Ascendants would create a series of increasingly complex simulations, battles, diplomatic scenarios, resource management tests, designed to push the humans to their absolute limits. The humans, confident and unafraid, would eagerly accept the challenge, convinced they could outsmart their alien counterparts. But they were not prepared for the next phase of the Ascendant strategy. The first simulation began innocuously. A war game. Two opposing forces, one controlled by the Ascendants, the other by the humans, fought for control of a strategic planet. The rules were clear, the stakes high. It was a battle of resources, strategy, and tactical superiority. The Ascendants expected to win easily. After all, they had far superior technology, intelligence, and experience. But what the Ascendants hadn't accounted for was the way the humans approached the game. The simulation began, and immediately, the Ascendants pressed forward with their advanced tactics, fast strikes, overwhelming force, and calculated decisions. But the human forces didn't engage in traditional warfare. Instead, they engaged in guerrilla tactics, attacking supply lines, diverting resources, and sabotaging key points in unexpected ways. Within hours, the Ascendant forces were thrown into disarray. How are they doing this? Zekar muttered in disbelief, watching the simulation unfold. They don't have our technological advantage. They shouldn't be able to counter us like this. Zyler's jaw tightened as the simulation continued. The human forces seemed to be everywhere at once, using their knowledge of the terrain and their understanding of psychological warfare to manipulate the Ascendants' response time. They had predicted the Ascendants' every move and countered it before they even had the chance to execute it. They're not fighting us directly, Tyler said slowly. They're making us fight ourselves. It dawned on him. This wasn't about brute strength or firepower at all. The humans weren't simply trying to overpower them. They were forcing the Ascendants to engage in a battle of wits, something they had never anticipated. They were using chaos as their weapon, throwing the Ascendants into confusion, making them second-guess every decision. Their minds, they are so unpredictable. Zyler murmured, frustration creeping into his voice. It's as if they were born to disrupt order. Zekar paused, his fingers hovering over the controls. If they can do this to us in a simulation, what could they do in a real conflict? Zyler, his eyes narrowing in determination, finally understood the terrifying truth. It wasn't that the humans were weak or ill-prepared. It was that they were impossible to predict. Their strength lay in their ability to turn the most basic situation into something far more complex than any alien intelligence could anticipate. Their true power was not in defeating the enemy, but in making the enemy defeat themselves. We'll have to rethink everything, Zyler said grimly, a plan beginning to form in his mind. We can't defeat them head-on. We'll need to learn how to counter their unpredictability, or we'll be their next target. Zyler stood alone in the observation deck of the flagship, staring at the swirling clouds below as Earth spun in the distance. His mind, once sharp and in control, now felt like it was constantly being pushed to its limits by the unpredictability of humanity. The earlier simulations had been a humbling experience. No amount of superior technology or overwhelming force had prepared them for the way humans fought. He clenched his fists, fighting the tension in his chest. For the first time, he could not see a clear path forward. The Ascendants, with all their knowledge, strength, and technology, were at a disadvantage against a species that, on the surface, seemed so weak. The simulations were only the beginning. Zyler muttered to himself, "If we cannot understand how they think, we will never defeat them." Zekar entered the room, his expression weary but resolute. "Commander, I've analyzed the data from the last simulation. It's astonishing. They have no pattern, no obvious weaknesses. Every strategy we used, they countered with something unexpected. Xylar nodded, turning toward him. I know. And it's more than just their strategies. It's their entire approach to conflict. They don't need to win in the traditional sense. They just need to make us lose. Zikar's brow furrowed as he absorbed the commander's words. It's like they force us to play by their rules. They don't engage directly in the way we expect. They exploit our weaknesses, make us second-guess ourselves. They're chaotic, and in that chaos, they thrive. Exactly, Xylar said, his voice low. They create an environment where their unpredictability is their greatest strength. They don't defeat us by power or intelligence. They defeat us by making us overthink, making us question every step we take. A long silence passed between them, both of them lost in thought. Xylar had come to a chilling realization. This wasn't a species they could conquer easily. The Ascendants were known for their ruthlessness in battle and their ability to adapt quickly. But humanity was different. They had no single clear advantage. Instead, they were the masters of adaptation itself. There's something more at play here, Xylar said, a dark edge in his voice. We've underestimated them. We thought they were nothing more than a primitive species clinging to survival. But their survival is not about brute strength. It's about their ability to innovate in the face of chaos. Zikar's eyes widened. Commander, you're suggesting that their entire species is built on this ability to adapt to anything, even the most hostile situations. Xylar didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward the console in front of him, bringing up more data. He scrolled through the human history, focusing on the wars, the disasters, the countless near extinctions. And yet, in every instance, humanity had found a way to not only survive, but to thrive. It wasn't just about physical survival. It was about outsmarting the challenge. They don't just adapt to the environment. They adapt to the unexpected, Xylar said, realization dawning. Every time something new challenges them, they find a way to turn it to their advantage. The coffee, that was only the beginning. Their true power lies in this adaptability. Zikar hesitated. But how do we counter that? How do we fight against a species that doesn't play by any rules? Xylar's expression darkened. We don't fight them head-on. We can't. We've already tried that, and they outmaneuvered us. If we want to win, we need to understand their way of thinking. We need to adapt to their unpredictability. We need to learn how to outthink them. It was a sobering thought. The Ascendants had prided themselves on their mental superiority, on their ability to outmaneuver any opponent with precision. Yet here they were, faced with a species whose greatest strength wasn't brute force or technology, but their inherent chaos and unpredictable brilliance. The Ascendants were now the ones who had to adapt, and the realization gnawed at Xylar. We'll need to conduct deeper studies, Xylar continued, not just on their military tactics, but on how their minds work, how they think, how they innovate. We need to get inside their heads. Only then will we have a chance of outmaneuvering them. Zikar nodded slowly. We can gather more data. Perhaps if we study how their cultures evolve, how their societies function, we might see patterns that we've missed before. Xylar turned away from the window and fixed his gaze on Zikar. I want all your best minds on this. I don't care how long it takes. We must learn everything about their psychology, their creativity, and their ability to innovate under pressure. We're not just dealing with a species that fights back. We're dealing with a species that reinvents itself with every challenge. If we're going to succeed, we need to think like them. Zikar hesitated before speaking again. And what if they don't want peace? What if they see us as a threat? Xylar's eyes narrowed. Then we'll have no choice but to outsmart them, Zikar, and we'll use their own unpredictable nature against them. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of their next steps. The Ascendants had always believed themselves to be the apex species in the galaxy, but now They were facing something they had never encountered before, a species that didn't rely on strength, weapons, or technology, but on an Commander, Zekar said, walking briskly into Xylar's private quarters. "We found something in their history, something that confirms our worst fears." Xylar turned, his expression cold but expectant. "What have you discovered?" Zekar gestured to the holographic screen beside him. Throughout human history, there are countless instances of their leaders, generals, and diplomats using deception as a primary weapon. Their ability to spread misinformation, create false narratives, and manipulate entire populations. It's astonishing. It's not just that they fight with tactics, they fight with lies. Xylar's brow furrowed. Deception. That would explain how they outmaneuvered us. Their ability to make us question our own knowledge, to confuse us into making the wrong move. Zekar nodded. Exactly. And it's not just limited to warfare. Their entire social and political systems are based on creating illusions. They fabricate truth, twist facts, and construct narratives that allow them to control entire populations, sometimes without ever firing a shot. Xylar's mind raced. He had been fooled by their ingenuity, their unpredictable strategies, and their ability to innovate. But now, the most dangerous aspect of humanity was becoming clear. It wasn't enough to be creative. They could fabricate reality itself to their advantage. If we're going to understand them, Xylar said, his voice growing more intense, we must see through their lies. We need to understand how they weave deception into every aspect of their society. Zekar hesitated, then spoke with an almost reverent tone. But Commander, what if deception is the key to understanding their true power? What if at the heart of their civilization, everything we see is just a mask? If we can't pierce through that, we might be doomed to never truly defeat them. Xylar's eyes narrowed. You mean, we're not just dealing with a species that can outsmart us, but one that actively creates false realities. That's a dangerous game to play. Zekar's gaze hardened. I believe the humans are aware of our underestimation. They are aware of our pride. And they've been playing us from the start, shaping the narrative of our encounters with them. Everything they've shown us could be a lie, an elaborate ruse to make us believe they're weaker than they truly are. Xylar stood still for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of this revelation. The Ascendants had believed they were the masterminds of manipulation, experts in the art of control. Yet here they were, facing a species that weaponized deception on a level they could scarcely comprehend. The truth became evident. This was no longer about conquering a planet. It was about understanding humanity on a psychological level that went far beyond mere strategy. Xylar's mind sharpened. We must prepare for a different kind of battle. It's not about strength. It's not about innovation. It's about uncovering the truth, the hidden layer beneath their actions. We need to understand the full scope of their deception. Zekar nodded in agreement. We'll have to infiltrate their political systems, their media, their very cultural fabric. We need to observe them from the inside and learn how they maintain control. If we can't see through their illusions, we will never defeat them. But we must be cautious, Xylar warned, his tone darkening. If we push too hard, we may provoke them into revealing their true nature and their true power. We've already seen how quickly they adapt when pushed. If we're not careful, we could ignite a war that we won't survive. Zekar's expression grew grim. So, what is our next step? How do we begin? Hilner stared out at the swirling clouds of Earth below, the weight of their next move pressing on him. We start by learning the most dangerous weapon of all, how to deceive them. Only then can we create our own narrative, one that will make them doubt their own perception of reality. It's time to turn the tables. As the Ascendants prepared for their next steps, the lines between truth and deception became ever more blurred. Humanity had played a game of strategy with them, using not just their minds, but their mastery of illusion. Xylar and his crew were now faced with a daunting challenge. How could they defeat a species that didn't just think outside the box, but created an entirely different box in the first place. It was a war of perception now, and Xylar knew that if they were to survive, they would have to play a game far more dangerous than anything they had ever imagined. Xylar stood at the helm of the flagship, gazing out at the abyss of space. The stars blinked coldly at him, distant and indifferent. The war of perception had begun, and the Ascendants were now in a dangerous game of psychological warfare. They were no longer just trying to outsmart humanity with brute force or advanced technology. They had to become masters of deception themselves. Xikar had assembled a team of the best tacticians and spies in the fleet, each with the sole mission to infiltrate the fabric of human society. Their goal was clear: uncover the truth hidden beneath the layers of deception humans had woven into their daily lives. It was a process that required subtlety and patience, traits that Xylar's people didn't typically possess. Ascendants were direct, efficient, masterful conquerors, but this was different. Humanity had shown them that the battle wasn't won by force alone. It was won by shaping the narrative, by controlling what others believed to be true. "We've begun," Xikar said, entering the room. His tone was measured, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "We've started our infiltration. But, Commander, I must warn you, we've already encountered resistance." Xylar turned, a quiet growl escaping his throat. "Resistance? From who?" "The humans. They're aware of us. Perhaps not directly, but they know something is amiss. Their counterintelligence is far more advanced than we expected. They've already begun planting misinformation in our channels. It's as if they're expecting us." Xylar's expression darkened. If humanity had already anticipated their moves, it meant they were far more prepared for this psychological war than the Ascendants had ever imagined. It wasn't just their military prowess or their unpredictable strategies that made them dangerous. It was their ability to anticipate the future, to see the next move in a game they hadn't even started playing yet. "Then we need to adjust," Xylar said, a dangerous edge to his voice. "If they are expecting us, then we'll give them something they don't expect. We need to become even more elusive. We need to shake the narrative without them ever realizing it." Xikar's eyes narrowed. "But Commander, how can we deceive a species that is already watching us so closely? How do we infiltrate their minds when they seem to be 2 steps ahead of us?" Xylar paused, his mind racing. The idea was forming in his head, complex, dangerous, and possibly the only way forward. We'll need to use their own systems against them, their media, their communication channels. We'll create confusion, blur the lines between fact and fiction, until they can no longer tell the difference. And we'll do it in plain sight. Xikar looked hesitant. "You're suggesting we fabricate our own narrative, flood their media with false information. If we do that too aggressively, we risk revealing our presence. The humans are far more adept at controlling information than we anticipated." Xylar's gaze was cold and calculating. "Exactly. That's why we must be subtle. We won't flood them with obvious lies. Instead, we'll insert truths, real information, twisted just enough to plant doubt. We'll manipulate their own narratives, showing them their weaknesses in ways they won't immediately recognize." The plan was risky. It was not simply about breaking humanity's physical resistance. It was about breaking their mental will, their trust in their own systems. By introducing doubt into their foundations, the Ascendants could weaken humanity without a single shot being fired. Xikar seemed to grasp the scope of the plan. "We need to control the flow of information. We'll hack their communication channels, subvert their media outlets, and spread carefully crafted disinformation. It won't be enough to disrupt them. It will be enough to make them question themselves." Xylar nodded. "Exactly. And once they're questioning everything, once their confidence in their own reality begins to fracture, we'll be able to manipulate them from the inside. They'll never know what hit them." As the Ascendants set their plan into motion, the first signs of success began to emerge. Rumors spread across the human networks. Rumors about alien invasions, internal betrayals within their governments, and even false sightings of ascendant ships. The confusion was palpable. Humanity, once so sure of itself, was beginning to question the validity of everything they saw and heard. Was it a real threat? Was it all a lie? But what the Ascendants didn't realize was how deep their own plan was sinking into the fabric of human society. The more they manipulated, the more the humans adapted. With every piece of misinformation they injected into the system, humanity's ability to discern truth from fiction grew stronger. They had become so skilled in this battle of narratives that the Ascendants' tactics were starting to backfire. The more they tried to break the truth, the more humanity held on to it. One day, as Tyler watched the latest reports filtering through their intelligence channels, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. The humans were starting to fight back in ways he hadn't expected. Their media, which had once been an easy target, had evolved into a tool of counter-propaganda. They were actively neutralizing the Ascendant lies with their own brand of truth. The more the Ascendants pushed, the more resilient humanity became. Sylar clenched his fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. They're learning faster than we anticipated. Zekar entered, his face grim. It's no longer just about misinformation. The humans are beginning to weaponize their own truth against us. We're losing control. Sylar turned toward him, his mind spinning. The Ascendants had thought they could manipulate humanity's perception, but now it was clear they had underestimated the human will to hold on to reality. We need to change our approach, Sylar said. If they can adapt this quickly, we need to confront them directly, on their terms. It's no longer about manipulating information. It's about making them face the truth we've been hiding. Only then will we see who stands victorious. And so, the final stage of the war began, not in the shadows of deception, but in the light of truth. The Ascendants would have to decide if they were willing to expose their own lies and face humanity on a new battlefield, one where both sides would have to confront the very nature of their existence. The tension was palpable across the Ascendant fleet. After weeks of psychological manipulation, misinformation, and subtle deception, the battle for control over the narrative had reached a boiling point. What had started as a battle of strategies and military superiority was now a war for truth, perception, and the very foundations of reality itself. The Ascendants, who had once believed they could conquer through strength and intellect, were now facing the ultimate question. Could they adapt as quickly as humanity had? Sylar paced across the command deck, his mind buzzing with frustration. Their attempts to twist humanity's perception had backfired. Every move they made to plant disinformation only strengthened the humans' resolve and their ability to discern truth from lies. What had been a subtle campaign of control now felt like a race against time, one they were losing. "Commander," Zekar said, stepping forward with a grave expression, "we've intercepted communications. The humans, they're planning something. It's not just propaganda anymore. They're coordinating a unified response. They've come together as a species to confront us, directly." Tyler turned sharply to face his lieutenant. A unified response. What does that mean? Zekar's voice was tinged with a mixture of awe and concern. They've transcended the chaos we've created. They're using truth now, not just to fight us, but to turn everything we've done against us. They're beginning to expose our deceptions, one by one. They've learned how to take our lies and expose them as fact. Their entire species is on the verge of confronting us as one. No divisions, no confusion, just a singular goal to fight back. Sylar felt a wave of unease wash over him. The humans had always been unpredictable, but this was something different. They weren't just resisting. They were rallying together, using their own truths to push back against the Ascendant narrative. What was once a fractured human society, rife with conflict and confusion, had now unified in the face of a common enemy. And that enemy, Sylar now realized, was not just the Ascendants. It was the very idea of manipulation, of lies, and of forced submission. "Prepare the fleet," Sylar ordered, his voice sharp. "If they're going to confront us directly, we need to be ready for what comes next. We cannot afford any more mistakes." As the Ascendant fleet mobilized, Siler felt the weight of his previous decisions pressing down on him. The Ascendants had made a grave error in thinking they could deceive humanity into submission. They had underestimated the human spirit, not just their ingenuity or adaptability, but their unyielding drive to protect their own sense of truth. Humanity was not just fighting for survival, they were fighting to preserve the very fabric of their existence. The first wave of humanity's response came swiftly. The unified communication channels began flooding with messages of resistance. It wasn't just soldiers or political leaders speaking. It was ordinary citizens, scientists, engineers, teachers, and farmers, all coming together to expose the Ascendant deception. They had used the information the Ascendants had spread to their advantage, taking each lie and twisting it back on itself. They didn't need to fight with weapons or ships. They fought with truth, with facts, and with the undeniable power of collective will. In one broadcast, a human leader, a figure that had once been unknown to the Ascendants, spoke directly into the hearts of billions. "We've been deceived, but now we have learned. We know the truth. The Ascendants tried to make us question ourselves. They tried to manipulate our reality. But we are stronger than that. We stand together, united. And now we'll stand for our truth." Siler clenched his fists. He had never expected this level of unity from a species so often divided. He had believed their infighting, their differences, would keep them weak. But he was wrong. The very thing that had once made humanity vulnerable, its diversity, was now its greatest strength. "We've underestimated them," Zekar murmured, his voice quiet but filled with a kind of dread. "They've not only adapted to our tactics, they've surpassed us. We can't keep up with them." Tyler knew Zekar was right. The Ascendants had long prided themselves on their ability to control and manipulate, but in their arrogance, they had forgotten the most dangerous aspect of humanity: their capacity for truth and their refusal to be bent to another's will. Humanity had turned their own tactics back on them, revealing the Ascendants' lies and erasing their manipulations with a flood of undeniable fact. The final confrontation was inevitable. The Ascendant fleet prepared to descend upon Earth, knowing that their superiority in technology and military might still be enough to win. But the cost would be great. Humanity's spirit was no longer fractured. It was now a collective force, and Zyler could feel it in the air. Something was about to change. The Ascendants could either continue their war of lies, or they could face the truth humanity had been speaking all along. "We face a new kind of enemy," Siler said, his voice filled with grim determination. "One that doesn't fight with weapons, but with the truth. We cannot defeat them by force alone. We have to destroy their will to resist. We must make them question their own unity." But deep down, Siler knew it was already too late. Humanity had already won. The Ascendants had lost their greatest weapon, control of the narrative. And in the end, it would be truth, not force, that would determine who survived.